The killer Poirot had already cleared a Hercule Poirot mystery. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Thornfield Cross. The motor car that bore us through the Cotswold lanes that bright September morning of 1934 belonged to Sir Reginald Marchmont, and it was, like the man himself, polished to an almost ostentatious gleam. I sat beside Poirot in the rear seat, watching the hedgerows blur past, while my friend held himself with that particular stillness which I had come, over the long years of our association, to recognise as the prelude to acute observation. "You are pensive, Hastings," he remarked without turning his head. "I was only thinking," I said, "that it has been some time since we accepted a country invitation, and from a man you scarcely know. Sir Reginald and I are not strangers. Our acquaintance dates from the affair of the Lion Emeralds in 1928, though I grant you, mon ami, our paths have crossed but rarely since. He writes that his daughter, Cynthia, is to be married within the fortnight, and that the gathering at Thornfield Cross will be both a celebration and, as he phrases it, un rassemblement difficile, a difficult gathering. What does he mean by that?" Poirot smoothed the silk of his moustache with the tip of one gloved finger. "That, Hastings, is precisely what I intend to discover. A man who invites a detective to his daughter's wedding does not, in general, anticipate an evening of unalloyed pleasantness." The drive turned through wrought-iron gates surmounted by the Marchmont arms, and Thornfield Cross rose before us, a long, low manor of honey-coloured stone, 4 centuries old at least, with mullioned windows that caught the autumn sun and threw it back in flashes of amber. A great cedar stood upon the lawn, and beyond it a knot garden lay in geometric perfection, its low box hedges casting precise little shadows. The whole effect was of a place that had stood untroubled by time, though I was soon to learn that beneath this serenity ran currents far less placid. We were greeted upon the gravel sweep by Sir Reginald himself, a broad weathered man of perhaps 60, with silver hair cropped close and a soldier's bearing that even the years could not slacken. His handshake was firm, his welcome warm, but I noted at once a certain tightness about his eyes that suggested he had not slept easily. "Poirot, my dear fellow, and Captain Hastings, you cannot know how grateful I am that you have come." "It is our pleasure, Sir Reginald," said Poirot, "but I detect from your tone that pleasure is not perhaps the dominant note of this gathering." Sir Reginald gave a short, mirthless laugh. "You miss nothing, do you? Come inside. Drinks before dinner. You shall meet them all and form your own impression." We were shown by a stiff-backed butler, Hodge I learned his name to be, through a stone-flagged hall in which a long-case clock ticked with sonorous gravity, and thence into a drawing-room of considerable size where the company had assembled. The light slanted through the western windows and fell upon a tableau which I took, at first, to be one of pleasant family ease. It required only a few minutes to perceive that it was nothing of the kind. There was Lady Marchmont, Sir Reginald's second wife, a woman perhaps 20 years his junior, dark-haired, beautifully dressed, and possessed of that careful composure which often conceals a turbulent interior. There was Cynthia, the bride-to-be, a slight girl of 23 with her father's grey eyes and a nervous habit of folding and refolding the edge of her cardigan. Beside her stood her affianced, Mr. Julian Vane, a tall young man of pleasing features, and a manner I might have called assured, had I not detected beneath the assurance a flicker of something more guarded. There was a Mr. Edmund Marchmont, Sir Reginald's younger brother, sallow-faced, with the slightly frayed elegance of a gentleman who has known reverses of fortune. There was a Miss Penelope Hartwood, Cynthia's godmother, a tall and angular woman with iron-grey hair and the bright, watchful eyes of a person who collects information as some collect porcelain. There was a Dr. Lucian Brace, the local physician, an old family friend, square-built and ruddy and inclined to laughter, and there was, most curiously, a young man named Martin Reeve, introduced to me as a kind of secretary or amanuensis to Sir Reginald, though his bearing seemed to me too easy for a paid retainer's. Lastly, there was the bride's elder sister by Sir Reginald's first marriage, Mrs. Adela Whitcomb, a handsome widow of perhaps 35, dressed in dove grey, who watched her stepmother with eyes that, while perfectly courteous, held no warmth whatsoever. 8 persons then, beneath that low-beamed ceiling, and Poirot and myself making 10. Sherry was poured, cigarettes were offered. The conversation moved with the slightly mechanical quality of people determined to appear easy in one another's company. "You have a charming home, Sir Reginald," said Poirot, accepting his glass. Charming, yes, murmured Edmund Marchmont with a small dry smile, and so very full this week of charming people. The remark was made lightly, but it fell into a small pocket of silence, and I saw Lady Marchmont's hand tighten upon the stem of her glass. "Edmund is in one of his moods," she said evenly. "Pay him no attention, Monsieur Poirot." "On the contrary, madame," said Poirot, "I find the moods of others always most instructive." Dinner was announced. As we passed into the dining room, Sir Reginald drew Poirot aside, and though I was a step behind, I caught a fragment of what he murmured. "After the meal, Poirot, in my study, there is a matter I must lay before you." Poirot inclined his head a fraction of an inch. "I am at your disposal, Sir Reginald." The dinner itself was excellent. A clear soup, a turbot, a saddle of mutton, but the conversation grew as the wine descended, more brittle rather than less. Edmund Marchmont made 2 further remarks, each pitched as a pleasantry, and each containing beneath its surface the small bright glint of malice. Mrs. Whitcomb addressed perhaps 4 sentences to Lady Marchmont, and not a single one to Mr. Vane. Miss Hartwood watched everyone in turn, her thin lips compressed into something between attention and judgment, and Cynthia, the bride, ate almost nothing, and her young man beside her seemed sometimes to forget she was there at all. It was during the dessert that I observed the small incident which would, a day later, return to me with terrible significance. Mr. Vane, reaching across the table for the salt, allowed his eyes to rest for perhaps 2 seconds longer than courtesy permitted upon the face of Mrs. Adela Whitcomb. She did not return the look. She did not appear to notice it at all. But the look had been given, and Cynthia, beside him, saw it. She said nothing. She only set down her spoon, very precisely beside her uneaten pudding, and looked towards the window, where the last light was draining from the autumn sky. "Well, Poirot," I said, much later when we had retired to the room appointed us, and the manor had fallen into that particular stillness which great houses adopt at midnight. "What do you make of them?" He stood at the window, in his dressing gown, looking out across the dark lawn to where the cedar made a vast black shape against the stars. "I make of them, Hastings, a household of which not one member trusts another. There is here much fear, much resentment, much old hurt, and at least 1, perhaps 2, secrets of the most considerable kind." He turned from the window. "Sir Reginald wished to speak with me tonight in his study. He did not. He was prevented. By what, by whom, I do not yet know. But I tell you this. The wedding, if it takes place at all, will not be the only event for which we shall be needed at Thornfield Cross." I looked at him, startled. "You expect something." "I expect, mon ami, what I have already begun to perceive, the air of a house in which something has been long postponed, and is now drawing very near." He extinguished the lamp. The cedar stood silent on the lawn. And somewhere in the depths of the house, a door closed softly, and the old clock in the hall chimed once, for the half-hour past midnight. Chapter 2. A voice. Behind a locked door, I was wakened by a sound I could not at first identify. A sharp, repeated rapping, accompanied by the high, querulous tones of a woman's voice raised in distress. The light at my window was the cold, pale grey of early morning, and as I sat up, fumbling for my watch, I heard Poirot already moving in the adjoining dressing-room. "Hastings, you are awake? Bon, dress quickly." It was 20 minutes past 7. I pulled on my clothes and emerged into the corridor to find a small, anxious knot of persons assembled before the door of what I took to be Sir Reginald's bedroom. Lady Marchmont was there, in a wrapper of pale blue silk, her dark hair loose upon her shoulders, her face drawn. Hodge the butler stood with his hand upon the door-handle. A housemaid, white as her own apron, hovered behind, and presently Edmund Marchmont came hurrying along the corridor, knotting the cord of his dressing-gown. "He does not answer," Lady Marchmont was saying. "I knocked at 7, as he had asked me to. He was to ride before breakfast, and there is no reply. Hodge, the door is locked from within, you say?" "Yes, my lady, I've tried it twice." "Then we must break it." This was Edmund, brisk and pale. "Hodge, the housekeeper's master key is surely she." "It will not turn, sir. There is, I believe, a key on the inner side, and it is in the lock." Poirot stepped forward. He addressed with his usual immaculate care, as though no household alarm could excuse a less than perfect knot in his cravat. "Permit me, madame," The door is solid." "Oak," said Edmund. "Old oak, and the lock new. 3 years since. Then we must apply force. Captain Hastings, if you will assist." Edmund and I set our shoulders to the door, and at the third concerted heave, the lock gave with a splintering crack, and we stumbled into the room. The curtains were drawn, but a single shaft of grey light fell through a gap and lay across the carpet, and across also the figure that lay sprawled beside the writing desk. Sir Reginald Marchmont was upon his back. One arm was flung wide, the hand half curled. His other hand rested upon his chest, and beneath that hand, soaking through the white linen of his nightshirt, was a dark and dreadful stain. Lady Marchmont made a small sound, not a scream, but something more terrible, a kind of soft collapse of breath, and Edmund caught her arm. "Stay back," said Poirot sharply. "Both of you, please. Hastings. The door. Keep everyone in the corridor," I obeyed. Behind me, the household was now gathering. Cynthia, in a pink wrapper, white as paper, Mr. Vane behind her, his hand at her elbow, Miss Hartwood, fully dressed already, her eyes bright with a terrible alertness, Mrs. Whitcomb, slower, descending from the floor above, and last, young Reeve, hair tousled, shirt open at the throat. Dr. Brace, who I now remembered was a guest in the house, came pushing through them with his bag already in his hand. "Let me through, let me through. Reggie, good God!" He knelt beside the body. After a long moment he looked up at Poirot and shook his head slowly. "He is dead. An hour, perhaps a little more. He has been stabbed once, under the breastbone upwards. A man who knew what he was about." "The weapon?" asked Poirot. The doctor looked about him. "There," he pointed. Beside the desk, half concealed by the fallen cuff of Sir Reginald's dressing gown, lay a small, slim dagger of antique pattern, its blade dulled with blood. "It is from the case in the gallery," said Edmund, who had remained, despite Poirot's instruction, just within the doorway. "There are 6 such pieces. My brother collected them. He kept them under glass." "Under glass, that is locked." "Locked, yes, but the key hangs upon the same nail by the case." Poirot's small green eyes travelled slowly about the room. The bed was unslept in. No, that was not quite right. The covers were turned back, but the pillow bore no impression of a head, and the bedside lamp was extinguished. The writing desk stood beneath the window, and upon it lay an open blotting pad, an inkstand, and a sheet of writing paper bearing perhaps 4 lines of Sir Reginald's small, sharp hand. Poirot bent over this last without touching it. He was writing when he was struck. The pen has fallen there. See, between the leg of the desk and the rug. The ink is dry now, but it has spattered. He rose then from the chair, perhaps in surprise, perhaps to greet someone, and was struck almost at once. By someone he admitted himself, Monsieur Poirot. This was Miss Hartwood from the doorway, her voice dry as paper. The door, you will remember, was locked from within. "Precisely so, mademoiselle. The door was locked from within, and the key is—" Poirot crossed to the door and stooped. "Here, upon the floor, 3 feet from the lock, as though it had been struck out by our forcing of the door. Yes, or placed there afterwards. We must keep our minds open." "And the window?" I asked. "Let us see." He drew the heavy curtain. The window was a tall sash of 2 panels, and it was closed. Poirot tried it. The lower panel slid up with the smooth ease of a fitting recently oiled. He leaned out. Below was a flagged terrace, perhaps 15 feet down. To the left, a stout drain-pipe ran up the wall, no more than 2 feet from the window's edge. "Ah," said Poirot quietly. "So," he drew his head in. He examined, very carefully, the inner sill and then the outer, running one fingertip along the painted wood. He bent close. He looked up at last. "There is a smear here, upon the outer paint. A smear of, what shall I say, dust, mingled with something darker. A man has come up this pipe or gone down it very recently. Doctor, you will be so good as to inform the local police, and Hastings, you will remain here with me. The rest, I must ask all of you to wait in the drawing-room. No one is to leave the house. No one is to enter this room. Hodge, you are reliable. Then stand at this door, if you please, and admit no one until the constabulary arrive." The household drifted away in shocked silence. Lady Marchmont was supported by her stepdaughter Adela, an irony that would, in another hour, strike me with a queer force. Cynthia was led away weeping by her young man. Edmund lingered longest in the doorway, then turned and went heavily down the corridor. Poirot and I were alone with what had, until perhaps 2 hours before, been Sir Reginald Marchmont. "Hastings," said Poirot very softly, "you observe the writing paper?" "I do. Read me what is upon it." "Do not touch it." I bent. The hand was small and angular, the ink not quite dry at the bottom of the page. The letter, for it was a letter, read as follows: "My dear Poirot, I find I cannot wait until tomorrow. There is something I must tell you, and I find that having promised it to myself I cannot in conscience postpone it further. I have been a fool in one particular, and a coward in another, and the time has come to be neither. If you will be so good as to come to my study at—" There the writing ended, in a small uneven dash, where the pen had been laid down, or torn from the hand. "He was writing to you," I said. "He was writing to me." "Yes." Poirot stood for a long moment looking down at the page. Then he said, in a voice so quiet I scarcely caught it, "And whoever killed him, mon ami, did not wish that letter to be finished." Outside in the corridor the long-case clock struck the half-hour, and somewhere far away the first cock of the morning crowed across the autumn fields. Chapter 3. Inspector Japp brings the daylight. The local police arrived within the hour, in the persons of a Sergeant Pollard and 2 constables, and they were followed, by a fortunate concatenation, in the late morning, by an officer of considerably greater authority. Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard had been in Cheltenham upon another matter, and being telephoned by Sergeant Pollard's superior, had motored across without delay. He came tramping into the hall at 11:30, shaking the dust from his bowler, and his round red face brightened at the sight of Poirot, as a child's brightens at the sight of pudding. "Poirot, you here?" "Well, well, well, I might have known. Wherever the bodies fall, there shall the eagles be gathered together, eh? You are most poetic this morning, mon ami, though you mistake your eagles, I think, for vultures." Japp laughed. "Same difference. Now then, what have we got?" "What we have got," said Poirot, "is a locked-room murder of an English baronet upon the eve of his daughter's wedding, a household of 8 persons, each of whom appears to have at least one reason to wish him gone, a window with the marks of climbing upon its sill, an unfinished letter to myself, and a key that may or may not have been within the room when the door was forced. We have, in short, the inside of an Englishman's library, brought regrettably to life. Well, let's see the room." I shall not detain the reader with the long, careful business of the police examination. Photographs were taken, the dagger removed and packaged, the window dusted for fingerprints, the body, in due course, carried away under a sheet. Japp came down at last to the drawing-room, where the family had been gathered all morning, and conducted his interviews with that brusque competence which I had often had occasion to admire. Poirot sat a little aside in a high-backed chair and listened, his hands folded across his stomach, his eyes half closed like a small plump cat that pretends sleep but misses nothing. The facts as elicited were these. Sir Reginald had retired to his bedroom at 10:30 the previous night in the company briefly of his wife, who had bade him good night at his door at perhaps 11:15, and proceeded to her own room, which adjoined his by a connecting dressing-room. Lady Marchmont stated that she had heard her husband moving about for perhaps half an hour after, and then no more. She had taken a sleeping draught, prescribed for her some weeks earlier by Dr. Brace for nervous insomnia, and had slept until her maid called her at 7. Sir Reginald had risen, it seemed, between 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning, for the writing paper bore the date in his hand, 26th September, 1934, 2:45 a.m., and had gone to his desk. He had presumably been interrupted in the act of writing his letter to Poirot. The dagger had been removed from the case in the gallery, a long room on the same floor, perhaps 50 feet from the bedroom door, at some point during the night. The case was found unlocked when Pollard came to inspect it. The key, which usually hung upon a small brass nail beside the case, was missing, and was in due course discovered behind a Chinese vase upon the same gallery. No fingerprints of consequence were upon either case, key or dagger. The window of Sir Reginald's bedroom showed, as Poirot had noted, smears upon the outer sill, and traces of fresh earth upon the carpet immediately beneath it. A pair of patent leather evening shoes belonging to Sir Reginald himself were found in the bedroom. Their soles, however, were dry and clean. No other footwear in the room bore mud. The drainpipe, when examined, showed scratches upon its painted surface, consistent with the use of climbing irons, or alternatively with the cleated soles of a pair of country boots. At the foot of the pipe, in the soft earth of the flower bed, there was, and here was a curious thing, only one good print of a man's boot, large with a square heel. There ought by any sensible reckoning to have been at least 2 and probably 4, the prints of arrival and of departure. There was but the one. "Now then," said Japp when these particulars had been laid out, "we have a man stabbed in a locked room, window open at the bottom, mark on sill, mark in flower bed. So, somebody came up the pipe, climbed in, did the deed, climbed out, locked the door behind him from within. Wait, no, he can't have done. Oh, blast!" "Precisely, mon ami," said Poirot. "It is the door that gives us the trouble. If our climber leaves by the window, why does he first cross the room to lock the door from within? Why does he leave the key on the floor and not in the lock? And if the door was already locked when he arrived, say because Sir Reginald had locked it himself, how did Sir Reginald come to be writing a letter to a guest in the house, with the door locked, at 3 in the morning, unless he was expecting someone who would knock? And if he was expecting someone who would knock," I put in, "why use the window at all?" "Why indeed, Hastings? We shall have to think upon that. Meanwhile, let us continue." The interviews proceeded. Each member of the household was separately called in, and each was asked in essence 3 questions. Where they had been at 2:30 that morning, who, in their opinion, would have wished Sir Reginald harm, and what, if anything, they had heard during the night. Lady Marchmont had heard nothing. Cynthia had heard nothing. Vane had heard nothing. Edmund had heard, he said, a soft sound at perhaps 3 o'clock, which he had taken for the wind in the cedar. Miss Hartwood had been awake at 3, she frequently was, and had heard nothing whatever, which she stated with a certain pointedness, as though she felt this absence of sound to be itself significant. Mrs. Whitcomb had been asleep. Dr. Brace, whose room was upon the ground floor and at the opposite end of the house, had been asleep also, though he admitted to having heard the dogs in the stable-yard set up a brief commotion at perhaps 3:15, as though a fox had passed. Young Martin Reeve, when called, was the most nervous of the company. He gave his answers in short, jerky phrases, his eyes never quite resting upon Japp's face. He had been in his room, he said. He had heard nothing. He could think of no one who would have wished his employer harm. When he had retired, at some time after 11, when he had risen, when the alarm was given. Japp let him go and looked across at Poirot. Poirot lifted one eyebrow by the smallest possible margin. "That young man," said Japp, "is keeping something back." "That young man," said Poirot, "is one of several in this house who is keeping something back. It will be our task, mon vieux, to discover which back contains the thing that matters." I had occasion then to ask the question which had been forming in my mind all morning. "Poirot, the letter. He wrote it to you. He spoke last night of a matter he wished to lay before you. Do you suppose that he was killed because of what he wished to tell me? It is a possibility we cannot exclude, Hastings. It is perhaps even a probability. Someone in this house, you see, knew that Sir Reginald had invited me here for a reason. Someone in this house may have feared that reason very greatly. And someone in this house—" He paused, and the stillness of his small, neat body became, for a moment, almost ominous. "Acted last night, to ensure that the reason should never be spoken." "Then we are looking," I said, "for someone with a secret." "We are looking," said Poirot gently, "for someone with a secret so dangerous that to keep it they would commit murder. And in a house of 8 souls, Hastings, that is a search that will require all of the little grey cells we possess." The autumn light moved across the carpet of the drawing-room. In the great hall the long-case clock struck noon, and somewhere above us, in a quiet bedroom at the head of the stairs, the body of Sir Reginald Marchmont lay beneath a sheet, awaiting the men who would carry him at last away from the house he had built and ruled for 40 years. Chapter 4. The Garden of the Knot. It was Poirot's habit, when faced with a fresh tangle, to walk in the open air for an hour, alone, and order his thoughts. After luncheon, which was a subdued and almost silent meal, he requested my company, and we descended together to the knot garden which lay south of the house. The day had grown bright. The little box hedges shone in the sun. Bees moved with autumnal slowness over the late lavender. The cedar threw a vast pool of cold shadow upon the lawn. We walked together along the gravel path, and for some minutes Poirot did not speak. 8 persons, he said at last. Let us, Hastings, set them out. as one sets out one's pieces upon the chessboard, for unless we know our pieces we cannot play. Very well. First then, Lady Helena Marchmont, the widow, 42, I should think, second wife, married Sir Reginald in 1925, 9 years ago, was previously Helena Carstairs, a young woman, by all accounts of good family but limited means. She seems devoted enough. She seems, Hastings. The verb is operative. Note that she was the last person to see her husband alive, by her own account. Note that she was in the connecting room. Note that she had taken a sleeping draught. But who is to say she swallowed it? Or that the dose was as it should have been? Note also that she is 20 years his junior in her full maturity, and that when she looked upon his body this morning she made a sound which was— He paused, considering. Grief, perhaps. But it was not the grief of a woman whose world has ended. It was, if you will permit me the impertinence of the observation, the grief of a woman whose plans have been disarranged. That is a hard thing to say, Poirot. It is a true thing to say, and it does not yet make her a murderess. Second, Cynthia, the bride, 23. Sir Reginald's only child by his first wife, who died in childbirth 23 years since. Heiress presumably of the bulk of his estate, subject to whatever provision he has made for the present Lady Marchmont and for his brother. Quiet, nervous, devoted to her father, and, observe this, Hastings, engaged in 9 days' time to a young man who at dinner last night looked at her elder half-sister with the eyes of a man who has not yet finished a piece of business. I stared. You think Vane and Mrs. Whitcomb. I think, Hastings, that there is a current there. Whether it flows in one direction or in two, I do not yet know. Third, then, Mr. Julian Vane, 28, of Hampshire family, modest wealth, a younger son. He is reading, I believe, for the bar. He is engaged to be married to a considerable fortune. He is therefore, let us speak frankly, a young man with much to gain by his marriage, and much to lose if it should be broken off. Was there any threat that it should be broken off? Ah, Hastings. That is precisely what I do not yet know. But Sir Reginald was not, I think, a man who would have permitted his daughter to marry a man he had come to mistrust, and his letter to me spoke of something he must tell me, having been a fool in one particular and a coward in another. What was the foolishness? What was the cowardice? We do not know, but it is suggestive. Fourth, Edmund Marchmont. Fourth, the brother, younger by perhaps 5 years, a man of evident reverses. Note the cuff of his coat last night, neatly turned but slightly frayed. Note the cigarettes he smokes, a cheap brand, at variance with the rest of his bearing. Note the small remark at dinner, so very full this week of charming people. That was the bitterness of a man who feels himself less charmingly placed than he believes he ought to be. Edmund Marchmont stood until the birth of Cynthia to inherit Thornfield Cross. He has stood for 23 years next in line should anything happen to her, and now she's to be married, and will presumably in due course produce children. The shutting of a door, my friend. The shutting of a door upon a man who has waited perhaps long enough. You think him capable? I think every man capable, until I have proved him otherwise. Fifth Miss Hartwood, the godmother. An interesting piece, this. She is 60 if she is a day, and her eyes miss nothing. She was, I've learned by inquiry of the housekeeper, a school friend of the First Lady Marchmont, the mother of Cynthia. She has been a frequent visitor to this house ever since. She has no immediate financial interest so far as I can see in the matter, but the financial, Hastings, is not always the strongest motive. There are older things. Loyalty. Vengeance. The protection of those one loves. Sixth, Mrs. Adela Whitcomb. The elder daughter, half-sister to Cynthia. She is the child of Sir Reginald's first marriage also, and is therefore a Marchmont by blood. Widowed 2 years ago, a Whitcomb of, I believe, the city, and not, I suspect, in straitened circumstances, but not in luxurious ones either. She has been living, off and on, at Thornfield Cross since her widowhood. She is handsome, she is composed. She watches her stepmother with eyes of stone, and— He paused. Mr. Vane looked at her at dinner. Seventh, Dr. Brace. The physician, an old friend of the family, a man of whom, by all accounts, Sir Reginald was very fond. He prescribed Lady Marchmont's sleeping draught, That is itself a small matter to consider. And he would have been familiar with the layout of the house, the habits of its master, and the pharmaceutical means of departing this life, either suddenly or by slow degrees. He is, however, in possession, by report, of a thriving country practice, an amiable wife some miles distant, and no obvious motive whatever. And eighth young Martin Reeve, the secretary, 26, 3 years in Sir Reginald's service, came, I am told, with no family to speak of and recommendations which were, the housekeeper hinted, somewhat thinner than is usual. Sir Reginald took to him. Sir Reginald indeed was generous to him, and yet, when Inspector Japp questioned this young man this morning, he could not look him in the face. Poirot paused. Hastings, that young man is afraid. He is not necessarily guilty. But he is afraid. We had reached the centre of the knot garden, where a small stone seat stood beneath a pergola of late-blooming roses. Poirot sat down, with a small fastidious adjustment of his trousers at the knee, and folded his gloved hands. 8 persons, 1 murder, 1 unfinished letter, 1 window with the marks of climbing, 1 door locked from the inside, and 1 secret, we do not yet know whose, so dangerous that a man has died to suppress it. Where do we begin, Poirot? We begin, mon ami, where we began this morning, with the room itself. There is something there, Hastings, some small thing which my eye has noted but my brain has not yet digested. When I have it, then we shall see. He sat very still. A bee blundered against his sleeve and rebounded, indignant. He did not move. The shadow of the cedar stretched a fraction further across the lawn, and then, at length, he rose. Come, Hastings, let us return to the house. There are interviews I must conduct on my own account, and the first of them shall be with the young woman in pink, la fiancée triste, Cynthia. For when a father is killed upon the eve of a daughter's wedding, my friend, the daughter is always somewhere near the heart of the matter, even when she is innocent, especially when she is innocent. Chapter 5. The Bride Who Did Not Sleep, Cynthia Marchmont received us in the small morning room, a panelled chamber facing east, where the light at that hour of the afternoon had grown soft and oblique. She had changed from the pink wrapper of the morning into a plain dress of dark grey. Her hair was drawn back, her eyes were dry, but the dryness was the dryness of a person who has wept herself empty. Poirot was, as he always was with the grieving, very gentle. He took her hand briefly, expressed the conventional sympathies, and seated himself opposite her in a small upright chair. Mademoiselle, I shall not detain you long, but there are questions I must ask, and I think you would prefer to answer them to me rather than to the good inspector. Yes, her voice was small. Yes, I would prefer that. Then, first, last night after dinner, did your father speak with you privately? No, he was distracted. He spoke of going to his study. He kissed me on the forehead in the hall and said, "Good night, my dear. Tomorrow we shall have a long talk." That was all. A long talk? Did you understand him? I think so. Yes. Concerning what? She was silent for a long moment. Her hands were folded in her lap, very still. Concerning my marriage, she said at last. Did he disapprove of it? Not at first. When I first brought Julian home, 6 months ago, he was pleased. Julian charmed him. They walked together in the gardens for 2 hours. My father said afterwards that he was a fine young man. But, she stopped. But, mademoiselle, something changed. About a month ago, my father grew quiet. He would look at Julian sometimes when Julian did not see, and there was a strangeness in his look. Twice he made some remark to me. Small remarks. Are you sure, my dear? And one wishes only one's daughter's happiness. I asked him what he meant. He said it was nothing, but it was not nothing. I knew it was not nothing, and you did not press him. I was afraid to. Mademoiselle, why? She raised her eyes at last, and I was struck by what was in them. It was not the bewilderment of a young girl. It was something older and more weary. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I have loved Julian Vane for 9 months. I have wished to marry him with all my heart, and I have known, for at least the last 3 of those months, that if my father knew certain things about Julian, he would not permit the marriage to take place. I did not press him because I was afraid he had found out. Poirot's face did not change. What things, mademoiselle? She closed her eyes. I cannot say them. They are not entirely my own to tell. Mademoiselle, your father is dead. He has been killed, almost certainly by someone in this house. Anything that has been concealed, anything that has been left unsaid is now of the most dreadful significance. I beg you to consider very carefully before you decline to speak." There was a long silence. The clock ticked. At length she said, "Julian was, before he met me, engaged to another woman. This is not, mademoiselle, an unusual circumstance. He was engaged to her, and the engagement was broken off. By her, not by him. There was a child. Ah! The child was born and given up for adoption. The mother, the woman who'd been his fiancée, went abroad. She's not in England now. Her name? I never learned her surname. Julian called her Margaret. He told me of it himself 6 weeks after we became engaged. He said he wished to begin our marriage with no concealments. That was honourable, mademoiselle." "And yet you say, if your father had known—" "My father had very strict ideas, Monsieur Poirot. He would not have countenanced a son-in-law who had behaved so. He believed in a man's responsibility to a woman he had loved. He would have said that Julian should have married her. And how, mademoiselle, did your father, if he had not the information from yourself, come to suspect this matter? I do not know. Did your fiancé believe your father had suspected?" She hesitated. "I think, yes. In the last week Julian was different, watchful. He spoke once of leaving. We could be married quietly in London, he said. Why this great fuss in the country? I thought it was nerves. Her voice broke. Now I do not know what I think." Poirot regarded her a long moment. "Mademoiselle, one further question. Last night, between the hours of 2 and 3 in the morning, where were you?" "In my room, asleep. No, I was in my room. I was not asleep. I have not slept properly for a fortnight. I lay in bed, and I read. A novel." "Which novel?" "The Moonstone. Wilkie Collins. It's on the table beside my bed. You may verify." "Did you at any time during the night leave your room?" Yes, once. At perhaps 2:30. I went down to the kitchen for a glass of milk. I saw no one. I returned. That is all." "You saw no one upon the stairs? In the corridors?" "No one." She looked at him directly. "I am sorry. I would tell you if I had." Poirot rose and inclined his head. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been honest with me, and that is more than many in this house have been today. One last word, for what it may be worth. I do not believe your fiancé killed your father over the matter you have described. The pattern is wrong, but he may have been afraid that he should be suspected of doing so, and that fear may itself have led him to act in ways foolish. Be on your guard, mademoiselle, and eat something. You have eaten nothing since yesterday." She gave a small, surprising smile, the first I had seen from her. "You notice everything, Monsieur Poirot." "It is what I am for, mademoiselle." When she'd gone, I turned to him at once. "Then it was vain, surely. He had a motive. He saw Sir Reginald was about to forbid the marriage. Hastings, my dear Hastings, it is too neat. It is far too neat. Consider, Sir Reginald writes a letter to me. He writes, 'I have been a fool in one particular, and a coward in another.' Is the matter of his daughter's fiancé a matter in which Sir Reginald has been a fool? In which Sir Reginald has been a coward? I think not. I think the foolishness and the cowardice were his own, not another's. The thing he wished to confess was something he himself had done, or failed to do, not something his prospective son-in-law had done in another county 6 years ago. I was silenced. 'No,' said Poirot. 'We have been told one truth, Hastings. We have not yet been told the truth, and until we know what it was that Sir Reginald himself wished to confess, we shall not know who killed him, nor why.' He went to the window. The afternoon was waning. Far off, beyond the cedar, a flock of rooks rose and circled and settled again, calling to one another in the old harsh language of the autumn fields. 'I shall speak next,' he said, 'with Mr. Edmund Marchmont. He will not wish to speak with me. He will speak, and I think, Hastings, he will surprise us.' Chapter 6. The Brother in the Library. Edmund Marchmont was discovered in the library, a long room of dark oak lined upon 3 sides with books, and dominated by a portrait of the late Sir Reginald in the uniform of the Coldstream Guards, painted, by the look of it, some 30 years before. Edmund stood beneath this portrait when we entered, with a glass of whisky in his hand. He turned, and the resemblance to the man in the picture was suddenly very plain. The same long jaw, the same set of the shoulders, though life had used Edmund less kindly than it had used his elder brother. "Ah, Poirot and the captain. Take a chair by all means. I find I require a drink." "I trust you will not censure me for it." "On the contrary, Mr. Marchmont. Grief has its own protocols." "Grief," Edmund considered the word. "Grief. Yes, it is the proper word, I suppose. Reggie was my brother. We were not close. We have not been close for 30 years. But he was my brother." He drank. "Sit. Do sit. What can I tell you?" We sat. Poirot observed him over the steeple of his fingers. "Mr. Marchmont, you said at dinner last night a small remark, that the house was so very full of charming people. Will you tell me what you meant by it?" Edmund laughed without humour. "I was being unkind. It is an old failing of mine. I meant, let us be plain, that this gathering was not, despite appearances, a gathering of friends. There were tensions in this house, Monsieur Poirot." "There were several of them. Will you specify?" "I shall specify. My sister-in-law Helena and my niece Adela detest one another. Helena and Reggie, let us be honest, were not, of late, in the bloom of marital affection. Cynthia is engaged to a young man whom my brother had begun to mistrust. Miss Hartwood mistrusts everybody, including the silver. Young Reeve is a separate question. And I have for some years been a charge upon my brother's purse, which is a position no man holds with grace. You speak with remarkable candour. I drink whisky. It has the same effect. Mr. Marchmont, what was the relation between your brother and his secretary?" Edmund's eyes narrowed by a degree. "An interesting question." "Indeed." "Reggie was extraordinarily good to that boy. Extraordinarily. Brought him here 3 years ago, set him up in the house, paid him a salary out of all proportion to his duties. I've wondered sometimes why." "You have wondered. Have you also inquired?" "I have not. Reggie did not invite inquiry." Poirot let a small silence pass. Then he said gently, "Mr. Marchmont, who inherits from your brother?" "I imagine Cynthia does. In the main. There will be provision for Helena, a life interest in the dower house perhaps, and an income. There may be small bequests to Adela, to me, to a few servants. The estate, the house, the bulk of the capital, Cynthia. She will be a wealthy young woman. Very. And before her marriage. At present, Mr. Marchmont, before her marriage, or should anything happen to her, who would inherit?" Edmund went very still. "At present," he said slowly, "should anything happen to Cynthia, and it shall not, you understand, it shall not, the bulk of the property would, I believe, pass to me, as Reggie's brother and until last year the heir presumptive." "So if Cynthia had died before her father?" "Yes. And if Cynthia had married, and her father had survived to alter his will, he would have settled upon her absolutely, and through her upon any child she might have. I should have received presumably a small bequest, no more. And so, Mr. Marchmont, if I may put it brutally, the death of your brother, occurring as it does upon the eve of your niece's wedding, before any new will can be drawn up, leaves the situation as follows: the property passes to Cynthia, but should anything befall Cynthia before her marriage—" "Monsieur Poirot," said Edmund very quietly, "I should advise you to be very careful what you say next." Poirot inclined his head. "I say only what is logically the case. I do not accuse. I suggest that the timing of your brother's death is, from the strictly legal point of view, a curious one." Edmund set down his glass. He had grown, in the course of the last minute, several years older. "I didn't kill my brother, Monsieur Poirot. I did not go up that drain-pipe. Even if I were capable of it, which I'm not, having a weak ankle from the war. I did not steal a dagger from a case in the gallery. I did not have any reason, any sufficient reason, to do so. Yes, I am his next of kin after Cynthia. Yes, Cynthia is unmarried as we sit here. But I am not, I have never been, a man who would—" He broke off. He stared into his glass. "I owed my brother £14,000, he said at length in a different voice. "Did you know that?" "I did not. I had imagined some such figure. Reggie had carried me for 15 years. Bad investments, worse decisions, a divorce I will not bore you with. £14,000. Had he wished to call it in, I should have been ruined. I should have been disgraced. I should have lost the only thing I have left, which is the right to call myself a Marchmont and to be received in this house when I choose to be. and he had not called it in? He had, on the contrary, told me a fortnight ago that he intended to forgive the debt entirely in his next will. He wished, he said, to leave the family clean of obligations. That is, most generous. It was Reggie. Whatever else he was not small. He had his vices, but pettiness was not among them. And the new will, Mr. Marchmont? Was it drawn up? Edmund looked up sharply. I do not know. He spoke of it as a matter for the next month, perhaps. There was no urgency. There is now. Yes, there is now. Poirot was silent for some moments. Then he said, Mr. Marchmont, one other question. The secretary, Reeve. You said you had wondered why your brother was so good to him. May I ask whether you had formed any private theory upon the matter? Edmund looked at him for a long time. I had wondered, he said slowly, whether Reggie owed him something. Whether there was, I do not know how to say it, some old obligation. Reggie had, in his younger days, before he married my sister-in-law's predecessor, certain adventures. He was a young guardsman in London. Things happened, none of them, I emphasise, scandalous in any actionable sense. But Reeve came to us 3 years ago, with very thin recommendations, and Reggie hired him without a moment's hesitation. I've sometimes wondered whether the boy was, whether Reggie believed him to be, connected in some manner with some past affair. Did you ever raise the matter with your brother? Once, 2 years ago. He shut me down with the most ferocious abruptness I had ever experienced from him. I did not raise it again. Thank you, Mr. Marchmont. You have been of great assistance. When we were once more in the corridor, Poirot walked some distance in silence. At last he said, Hastings, you observe how it widens. An hour ago we had the matter of a young man's broken engagement and an illegitimate child. Now we have the matter of a baronet's possible old liaison, and a young secretary of mysterious origin. The fool and the coward. I have been a fool in one particular, and a coward in another. You think Sir Reginald? I think Sir Reginald may have been the father of Martin Reeve, Hastings. I think he may, 3 years ago, have learned of his son's existence, by what means I do not yet know, and brought him into the house, paid him handsomely, but lacked the courage to acknowledge him publicly. A fool in one particular, the early indiscretion, a coward in another, the failure, for 3 years, to do right by the result of it. And I think Sir Reginald, on the eve of his daughter's wedding, in the small hours of the morning, was at last sitting down to write to me, and through me, perhaps, to set in motion the events that should at last bring this matter into the open. And someone killed him to stop it. Someone, Hastings, killed him to stop it. The question is, who? Reeve himself, surely. Reeve himself. But Reeve, by this theory, gains by acknowledgement. He becomes a son. He becomes perhaps a partial heir. Why should he kill the man who is about at last to do right by him? Then someone who feared the acknowledgement. Lady Marchmont? She would not wish a bastard son recognised. Lady Marchmont, perhaps, or someone else, or someone whose interests we have not yet glimpsed at all. Poirot stopped at the foot of the staircase. He looked up its long sweep. We must speak with Mr. Reeve, Hastings, and we must speak with him with great delicacy, for if I am right, he is a young man who is mourning today not only an employer, but a father he was never permitted to acknowledge. Chapter 7. The Secretary's Silence. We found Martin Reeve in the small office that adjoined Sir Reginald's study upon the ground floor, a narrow room with a window upon the kitchen garden, equipped with a roll-top desk, a filing cabinet, and a single bookcase. He sat at the desk with his head in his hands. When we entered, he looked up sharply, and I saw that he had been crying. He rose at once with the formal civility of a man trained in subordinate places. Monsieur Poirot, Captain, may I help you? You may sit down, my friend, said Poirot kindly, and so may we. I think this conversation will be one which is better conducted seated. He took a chair. I took another. Reeve, after a moment, sank again upon his own. Mr. Reeve, began Poirot, you have served Sir Reginald Marchmont for 3 years. 3 years and 4 months. You came to him at the age of 22. From where? From a position with a firm of solicitors in Manchester. Hartfield and Crewe. I had been their junior clerk for 2 years. And before that, I was an articled clerk in a smaller firm, in Birmingham. And before that, a pause, a school in Yorkshire. St. Mark's near Halifax. It is, I take it, a charity foundation? A longer pause. Yes. Mr. Reeve, forgive me. I do not wish to be cruel, but I must ask, who are your parents? The young man's face whitened and then flushed. He looked at the floor. My mother died when I was an infant. My father, I never knew. Your mother's name? Eliza Reeve. She was in service. In London. In whose service? I do not know. I was given over to St. Mark's at the age of 2, with a small sum of money paid for my keep until I should be 16. The money came through a firm of solicitors. I never met the donor. I was told only that he wished me to be educated and to make my own way, and that his identity must not be inquired after. And you have never inquired? I have inquired. Twice. The solicitors would tell me nothing. The schoolmasters knew nothing. There was an end of it. And then, Mr. Reeve, 3 years ago, Sir Reginald Marchmont engaged you as his secretary. Yes. In what circumstances? He wrote to me at the firm in Manchester. He said, my name from a colleague. He invited me to come for an interview at his London club. I went. He spoke with me for an hour. He asked me about my schooling, my family, my prospects. At the end of the hour, he offered me the position. The salary was— The young man's voice faltered. Twice what I had been earning. The duties were light. I accepted at once. I should have been a fool not to. Did it not strike you as strange, Mr. Reeve, that a baronet should make so generous an offer to a young man whom he had never met, of whom he had heard only by report? It struck me? Yes, of course it struck me. I did not inquire. One does not. One thinks oneself fortunate, and accepts. And in the 3 years since, he was very kind to me, kinder than my situation warranted. He treated me in private almost as a member of the family, and yet, in public, he was always strictly the employer. There was something always slightly unspoken between us. I felt it. I didn't understand it. Poirot leaned forward. Mr. Reeve, may I tell you what I believe? I believe Sir Reginald Marchmont was your father. I believe he had had an affair with your mother in his bachelor days, perhaps 30 years ago. I believe she became with child, and that he learned of it, and that, being then a young man and frightened and embarrassed of his name, he made provision for the child financially but did not acknowledge him. I believe he later regretted this most bitterly. I believe that 3 years ago, by some chance, he came at last to know the identity of the boy he had so abandoned and brought him into his house, but lacked even then the moral courage to acknowledge him publicly. The silence in the small room was profound. The young man did not move. He seemed almost not to breathe. And I believe, said Poirot very gently, that perhaps a fortnight ago, Sir Reginald at last took the decision to make all this known, to you first, and then, perhaps, to the world. A long shudder passed through the young man's body. He told me, he whispered. He told me 10 days ago. Ah, he came to me here in this room in the evening. He had been drinking a little. He sat down where you sit now, and he said, Martin, I have something to tell you, and I have been a coward not to tell you for 3 years. And he told me everything. He told me the name of my mother. He told me the circumstances. He told me he had been a young fool and an old coward, and that he could no longer bear it. And you? I scarcely know what I felt. It was as if a door had opened upon a room one had always known was there but had never seen. He was, for 30 seconds, not my employer. He was my father. And then, the young man's voice broke, and then he wept. He wept like a child. He said he should announce it after Cynthia's wedding, that he should make a new will, that he should make me as much his son as the law permitted. He asked me to forgive him. I could not speak. I went to him. I knelt by his chair. I held his hand. Reeve dropped his head again into his hands. Was that the only conversation? Asked Poirot softly. There were 2 more, brief. He was preparing, he said, to write to you. He said you were the only man he could trust to manage the matter discreetly. He was to write to you yesterday, and to speak to you today, and tomorrow he was to tell Cynthia and Lady Marchmont. And then he was killed. And then he was killed. A long silence. Mr. Reeve, said Poirot at length, was there anyone else to your knowledge who knew of this matter? To my knowledge, no. Lady Marchmont? He had not told her. He intended to. Mrs. Whitcomb? He had not told her. He intended to. Mr. Edmund Marchmont? He had not told him. Anyone in the household? Any servant? None. None that I'm aware of. Mr. Reeve, where were you between 2 and 3 this morning? In my room, asleep. I had taken a small dose of Veronal. Dr. Brace had given me some, a week since, when I complained of sleeplessness. I have not been sleeping well since the conversation with Sir Reginald. I took a tablet at perhaps 11 last night. I slept until the alarm. Thank you, Mr. Reeve. I have only one further question. The night before Sir Reginald died, did he say anything to you about a particular danger? About a person he feared? Reeve hesitated. He looked up, and his eyes were red and tired. He said one thing. I have been turning it over in my mind all morning. He said it on the evening of the day before he died. Someone in this house, Martin, knows more than they should. Someone has been in my desk. Poirot's small green eyes flickered. In his desk. In his desk. He said no more than that. I asked him what he meant. He said, I shall speak of it to Poirot when he comes. He will know what to do. And then he changed the subject. And we did not return to it. Poirot was very still. Thank you, Mr. Reeve. You have been more help than perhaps you realise. We went out into the corridor. Poirot did not speak for some moments. Then he said, Hastings, someone in this house, knowing of Reeve's true paternity, killed Sir Reginald to prevent its public acknowledgement. But who? You have asked it 3 times. It is the question. It is the question, mon ami, and it has now, I think, only 2 possible answers, perhaps 3. But there is something I must look at. Come. He turned and walked rapidly towards the staircase. Where are we going? To Sir Reginald's study, Hastings. Someone has been in my desk, our young friend tells us. We shall see what the desk has, perhaps, to tell us. Chapter 8. The desk and its secret drawer. Sir Reginald's study was upon the ground floor, at the end of a corridor that ran off the great hall. It was a smaller, more masculine room than the library, a single window upon the rose garden, a leather-topped desk, 2 armchairs, and a bookcase of works on military history. Inspector Japp had had the room left untouched, save for a brief inspection that morning, and a constable was posted at the door who admitted us upon Poirot's nod. Now then, Hastings, said Poirot, drawing on a pair of fine cotton gloves, let us see what we may see. The desk itself was tidy. Papers in trays, a blotter, a silver inkstand, a small leather diary, in which Sir Reginald's appointments were recorded in his characteristic small hand. Poirot lifted this last and turned its pages. He had set down for tomorrow, that is today as we now stand, Poirot after breakfast. Yes. And for yesterday, solicitor, telephone, re-W. The W will be the new will, no doubt. And for tomorrow, Cynthia, after tea. He had planned everything. He was in earnest. Yes. He set down the diary. He drew open the central drawer of the desk. Letters, bills, a cheque-book. He lifted these out one by one, examined each and replaced them. He drew out the side drawers, 3 to the left, 3 to the right. In each, more papers, more correspondence, the orderly accumulations of a baronet's life. Nothing, Hastings, nothing immediately to our purpose, but he stood back and considered the desk as a whole. This desk is old. It is, I should say, late 18th century, and desks of that period, my friend, very frequently. He stooped. He ran his hands slowly along the underside of the desk's central frame. He pressed. He moved his hands an inch and pressed again. He went around to the back. Ah, voici. There was a small click. From the rear of the desk, just above the level of the knee-hole, a panel of wood perhaps 6 inches square sprang open by half an inch. Poirot drew it gently outwards. It was a shallow drawer, perhaps 2 inches deep. It was empty. Poirot stood looking at the empty drawer for a long moment. Hastings, he said softly, someone has been in my desk. You think there was something here? I think, my friend, that there was something here. I think there is now nothing. I think, observe, the dust, he pointed. The bottom of the drawer was lightly dusted, save for a single rectangular space, perhaps 4 inches by 3, where the dust was disturbed. There was an object here, a small object the size of a small notebook, or of a flat case, or of a sheaf of papers folded twice. It has been removed. Recently. How recently? Within the last 3 or 4 days, I should say. The disturbed surface has not had time to gather dust again, but it is no longer fresh. So the secret drawer was opened and emptied before Sir Reginald died. Before he died, Hastings. Yes, and he knew it had been opened. He told Reeve, "Someone has been in my desk." He knew, and he knew, what we do not yet know, that whatever was in the drawer was now in the hands of someone who should not have it. What could it have been? Poirot stood, regarding the empty drawer with that focused stillness which I had seen in him 1,000 times. "Letters," he said slowly. "Old letters. From 30 years ago. Letters to or from a young woman named Eliza Reeve. Or papers concerning the boy, or both. Or, possibly, something else altogether. But I incline, mon ami, towards the letters. And whoever took them, is the person we seek. For consider, Hastings. Someone discovered by some means that Sir Reginald had a hidden drawer. Someone opened it. Someone removed its contents. Someone read those contents. Someone discovered thereby the existence of Martin Reeve as Sir Reginald's son. And someone resolved that this knowledge should not become public. But Poirot, why? Why does it matter so much to anyone? Cynthia is the heir. She remains the heir. Reeve, even if acknowledged, would receive only a portion. The wedding can still proceed. Hastings, you reason from the surface. Let us reason from beneath. Who in this house most feared the public acknowledgment of Martin Reeve as Sir Reginald's son? Who most feared a new will that should set aside any provision for that son? I considered. Lady Marchmont, I suppose. A scandal would ruin her, and any sum settled upon Reeve would come, in part, out of what would otherwise have come to her. Lady Marchmont, yes, but there is another. Edmund Marchmont. But he is not, by all accounts, in the new will at all. Hastings, you are forgetting. There is no new will. The old will stands. The old will leaves the bulk to Cynthia, with provision for Helena, with small bequests to Edmund and to Adela, and, as far as we know, nothing to Martin Reeve. If Sir Reginald had written the new will, the situation would have been altered. Sir Reginald has been killed before he could write it. Cui bono, my friend? Whoever is about to lose by a change of will gains by the death which prevents that change. That is, Lady Marchmont and Edmund and possibly Mrs. Whitcomb. None of them gain from the present position more than the others, but all three lose if a new will is made favouring Reeve. Precisely so, we have narrowed our field, Hastings. The murderer is one of these three, or has acted at the instigation of one of these three. Now! He turned the secret drawer over in his hands. He examined the inner edge. He stopped. He brought the drawer close to his face. He sniffed. Hastings. Yes? This drawer has been opened by someone who used... He sniffed again. A particular pomade. A hair pomade. A man's pomade, I should say, though some women, in the modern fashion, also use such a thing for the marshalling. The trace is faint, but it is present. The hand that opened this drawer last touched the inside of it, here, with a fingertip slightly moist with the substance. I stared. Can you identify the brand? I shall not attempt it, but I shall, in the next hour, contrive to be near each member of this household in turn, and I shall, discreetly, apply my nose. There are not many men in this house, and few of them, I think, of an age to use pomade. Reeve does not. Vane does not. I have observed his hair. It is dressed only with water. Edmund, perhaps. Dr. Brace, perhaps. Sir Reginald. But Sir Reginald is dead, and besides, he had no occasion to leave the trace of his own pomade in his own drawer, in the disturbed pattern of dust which dates from after his last opening of it. So we are left with Edmund, Dr. Brace, the butler, possibly Reeve after all, and, though it would be unusual, one or other of the women. Poirot, what are you saying? Brace? But Brace has no motive. Has he not, Hastings? He did not elaborate. He closed the secret drawer. He stood back. He removed his gloves with finical precision, and he led me out of the study. In the corridor he paused. Hastings, attend. I shall now go on a pretext to each of the gentlemen in this house. You shall come with me, and you shall observe. You shall observe in particular the manner in which each man receives my approach, and one of them, I venture to predict, will receive it with a small, almost imperceptible flinch. That flinch, my friend, will tell us much. The afternoon light through the corridor windows had grown golden. From somewhere above, a clock chimed 4. and as we set off upon Poirot's strange small errand, I had the curious impression, rare in our long association, that he already knew the answer and was merely confirming it. Chapter 9. A Question of Pomade. I shall not detail the small theatre by which Poirot, in the course of the next hour, contrived to come within close range of each of the four men. He invented questions of inheritance to ask Edmund, of medical history to ask Dr. Brace, of household management to ask Hodge the butler, and of pure conversation to ask young Vane. In each case he stood near the man, leaned slightly towards him, and inhaled with the discreet attentiveness of a wine merchant. When at last we returned to our own room, and the door was closed, he sat down upon the edge of the bed and crossed his small neat hands upon his knee. Hastings. Yes? 2 men in this house use hair pomade, Edmund Marchmont and Dr. Brace. The butler, no. Vane, no. Reeve, no. And the trace in the drawer was, I am almost certain, almost, but not entirely, that of Dr. Brace. The note was distinctive, a pomade with the addition of bergamot and another scent. Patchouli, I think. It is the kind of mixture that is sold by certain old-fashioned barbers in the West End. Edmund's pomade, for what it is worth, is a coarser preparation, with a strong note of rosemary. I sat down slowly. Brace? But Poirot, what conceivable motive has Dr. Brace? Hastings? I have wondered that all afternoon, and I have come, just now, to a conclusion which I find distasteful, but plausible. Consider, Dr. Brace has been the family physician for, I believe, 15 years. He attended the present Lady Marchmont in her insomnia. He attended Sir Reginald in his various complaints. He moved freely in this house. He was on terms of intimacy and trust with all of its inhabitants. Yes. Now, Lady Marchmont and her husband had become, by Edmund's account, distant. Sir Reginald was perhaps no longer the husband he had been. Lady Marchmont is 42, handsome, intelligent. Dr. Brace is, 50? Reasonably attractive, of solid means, of established position in the county. His wife, Edmund mentioned, lives some miles distant. The arrangement is, let us say, not unusual in a country town. You think they were lovers? I think it is at least a possibility we must entertain. And I think, observe how it begins to fit, that if Lady Marchmont became aware, perhaps a fortnight ago, that her husband intended to acknowledge a previously unknown son, and to make a new will giving substantial provision to that son, she might well have spoken of it to her. Let us continue to call him her physician, Dr. Brace. And he, knowing of her dependence upon her marriage settlement, knowing of his own desire to one day marry her himself, knowing how disastrous a public scandal would be, may have undertaken to forestall the matter. By murdering his old friend. By murdering his old friend. Yes, Hastings, it is monstrous. But men have done worse for less, especially when the prospect of marrying a still handsome widow with a substantial life interest in a baronet's estate has begun to colour their judgment. But the locked door, the climbing on the drain-pipe, Brace is 50, you say. Is he fit for such an exercise? Brace is a thick-set man, and active, by all appearances. The climb is not difficult. I examined it myself this afternoon. But more to the point, Hastings, I am no longer convinced that the climber climbed at all. What? Consider the print, my friend. 1 print at the foot of the pipe, not 2, not 4, 1. The earth there is soft. Any man who had genuinely climbed that pipe would have left 2 prints upon arrival and 2 upon departure. At minimum, he left 1. Why? Because the print is a deliberate fabrication. Because the print is a deliberate fabrication. Précisément. Someone took a boot, perhaps even one of Sir Reginald's own boots, or perhaps a boot belonging to no one in this house at all, brought from outside in a bag, and pressed it once into the soft earth at the foot of the pipe. The better to suggest that an outsider had come and gone by that route. The smear upon the windowsill, equally fabricated, equally simple to produce. The murderer was inside the house all along. Then the locked door. The locked door is a more elegant problem, but not, I think, an insoluble one. Recall, Hastings, when we forced the door, the key was not in the lock. It lay upon the floor, 3 feet from the door. We assumed it had been struck out by our forcing of the door. But what if it had been placed upon the floor by the murderer? before leaving the room in such a position as to suggest it had been struck out. But the door was locked from within, and here, Hastings, we approach the simplest of all locked room solutions. The murderer did not need to lock the door from within. He needed only to leave the room with the door unlocked. Then, after the alarm was raised, as he stood among us in the corridor, perhaps the very first to arrive, or perhaps already at his post nearby, he had only to slip the key from his pocket, place it in the lock, turn it once from the outside. But the outer side has no keyhole that would— The outer side has a keyhole, Hastings. I have examined it. Most country house bedroom doors have keyholes upon both sides. The lock takes the key from either. Stand in the corridor, insert the key from the outside, turn it. The door is locked from within, with the key still in the lock from the corridor side, or, a more refined version, the key is then carefully pushed through the keyhole by means of a thin wire or pencil so as to fall on the inside of the room. The classic locked room device, my friend, as old as the pulps. Then, when our forcing of the door reveals the key upon the floor 3 feet from the door, we accept it as evidence that the door was locked from within. Bah! We are children. I sat in silence, working through it. And so Brace, on this account, killed Sir Reginald, locked the door from outside as he passed it, dropped the key by some such device through the keyhole onto the floor, descended to his own room, and was sound asleep when the alarm was raised. That is the bare bones of it, yes. But Hastings— Poirot held up a small finger. I am not yet sure. I have a theory. I have indeed a very plausible theory. But I do not yet have certainty. There is a step I must take, and that step is this. I must speak with Lady Marchmont alone this evening. If she is the lover of Dr. Brace, an accomplice in this deed, I shall know it. If she is not, and our doctor has acted alone, or for some other motive, I shall know that too. You will draw it out of her? Poirot's small green eyes crinkled. I shall, Hastings, draw it out of her. She will tell me herself. She will not know that she has, but she will. He rose. The afternoon was nearly gone. From the window, I could see the cedar blackening against a sky that had turned the colour of pearl. And tomorrow, mon ami, said Poirot quietly, I think I shall at last gather them all together in the drawing-room, as is my custom, and I think we shall see whether what I have constructed is the truth. Chapter 10. The Widow's Confession. Lady Marchmont received Poirot in her boudoir at 9 that evening, after the strained and largely silent dinner had at last ended. She had changed into a dress of black crepe. She sat in a low armchair beside the fire with her hands folded. Her dark hair was drawn back. Her face in the firelight was very pale and very composed. She motioned us, for I, at Poirot's request, was present, to chairs facing her. Monsieur Poirot, she said, what can I tell you? Poirot did not hurry. He arranged himself in his chair. He produced a cigarette case, asked permission, lit a slim cigarette, inhaled, exhaled a thin grey curl, and only then began. Madam, I shall not insult you by the indirection. I know certain things, and I shall tell them to you. After I have done so, you may correct me, or you may amplify as you see fit. She inclined her head. Very well. I know that your husband, 3 years ago, brought into this house a young man named Martin Reeve, in the capacity of secretary. I know that this young man is, in fact, your husband's natural son by an unmarried woman, whom your husband had loved in his youth, a Miss Eliza Reeve, who died many years ago. I know that your husband never publicly acknowledged this son, but that 10 days ago he resolved at last to do so, both in private and, by means of a new will and a discreet announcement, in such public form as he could manage. I know that your husband intended to confide all this to me, and that he sat down at his desk in the small hours of the morning to write to me, and was killed before he could finish the letter. Lady Marchmont had not moved. The firelight played upon her dark eyes. Yes, she said, I knew of the boy. You knew? For how long? For, I think, a fortnight? Your husband told you? My husband had not yet told me. I learned of it by other means. Madame, will you tell me what means? She looked at the fire. She did not speak for some seconds. My husband had a private drawer in the desk in his study. He believed it to be a secret. I had known of it for years. 6 months ago, in his absence, I opened it. There were letters there, from the woman, Eliza Reeve. There were also documents, a copy of the boy's birth registration, copies of payments made through solicitors, more recent papers concerning his appointment here. I read them all. I returned them and closed the drawer, and have said nothing of it to my husband or to anyone. And 10 days ago? 10 days ago, my husband told me after dinner that he had something he wished to lay before me when the wedding was over. He gave me to understand it concerned the boy Reeve. He said he had been weak too long. He said he intended to do right by him. And your reaction, madam? She raised her eyes. Monsieur Poirot, I shall be perfectly frank with you. My reaction was not good. I have been in this house 9 years. I have given my best years to my husband. I have borne, without complaint, the indifference of his elder daughter, the resentment of his brother, and, in the last 2 years, a coolness from my husband himself, which I had concluded was simply the consequence of approaching old age. To learn now that I was to be expected to accept, into the bosom of my family, the result of my husband's youthful folly, to share with him an inheritance, to permit a new and larger version of an old wound to open between us, I cannot pretend, monsieur, that I greeted it with serenity. Did you share these feelings with anyone? A pause. Yes. With Dr. Brace. She drew in her breath sharply. How? Monsieur Poirot? How? Madame, please. I have not the leisure to flatter you with the appearance of mystery. Dr. Brace is, I believe, your lover. Her composure broke at last. She put her hands to her face, and a small dry sound came from her, between a laugh and a sob. He's not my lover, Monsieur Poirot. Not in the sense I think you mean. He has been, for 2 years, a man whose company I have valued, whose conversation I have sought, whose hand I have held more than once across a tea-table in his consulting room. We have not crossed the threshold which would make me, in my own eyes or in any other, an unfaithful wife. But, she lifted her head, I have wished sometimes that we had. And he has wished it, and we have spoken of it, and we have spoken too of what life might be if I were one day not married. And so when I tell you, monsieur, that I told Lucian Brace 10 days ago of what my husband had said about the boy Reeve, you will understand it was no light or careless confidence. He listened? He listened. He was angry on my behalf. He said, I remember this. Reginald is a fool to do this. The boy will never be content with what he gives him. He will want more. He will become a perpetual claim upon you all. He said that. And, madame, did he, in any subsequent conversation, return to the matter, speak of measures? She looked at him. The firelight caught upon her cheek. She was no longer composed at all. Monsieur Poirot, I beg you, what are you suggesting? Madame, I am suggesting that Dr. Lucian Brace, your friend and mine, killed your husband last night, and I am asking you whether you believe him capable of it, and whether, in any conversation between you, he gave any hint of his intention. There was a silence of perhaps 30 seconds. Lady Marchmont stared into the fire. At length she said, almost in a whisper, 5 days ago, after the choir practice in the village church, I walked back with Lucian by the lower lane. I said to him, half in jest, I do not know how I shall bear the next month. I do not know how I shall sit at the wedding breakfast and smile. He said to me, I have remembered the words exactly because they made me cold. Helena, do not trouble yourself. The wedding shall not take place. There are events ahead that none of you can foresee. He said that. He said that. I asked him what he meant. He turned the conversation. I did not press him. I thought him fanciful. And when this morning, madam, you stood in the corridor before your husband's bedroom door, I knew, monsieur. She was weeping now silently. I knew before the door was forced. I knew what we should find. I have known since this morning, and I have not had the courage. She covered her face. I have not had the courage. Poirot rose. He crossed to her chair. He laid a hand very lightly upon her shoulder. Madame, you did not kill your husband. You did not even ask Dr. Brace to do so. You spoke in distress of difficulties. He alone made of those difficulties a course of action. You're not guilty of the act. You're guilty, perhaps, of not preventing it. That is a different burden, and it is one we shall together find a means of laying down. She wept on. He stood beside her in silence. After some little time he said, Madame, I shall ask of you only one thing. Tomorrow morning at 11 I shall gather the household in the drawing-room. I shall lay out what I know. I ask only that you say nothing to Dr. Brace before that hour. If he is forewarned, he may flee, and we shall have a longer and more painful business than need be. Will you give me your word? She nodded without looking up. We left her then to the firelight and the quiet, and went out into the corridor where Poirot stood for a long moment, his small hand upon the panelling of the wall, his eyes closed. "Hastings," he said, "this is a part of my profession I do not love. Not the murderer, though him I shall confront with a heart well steeled. The other one, the widow, the one who, in some chamber of her secret heart, at some late hour half wished it, and now must live the rest of her life knowing she half wished it. That is the portion of these affairs which is hardest." We walked in silence to our own rooms. Below us, in the great hall, the long case clock struck 11, and the autumn wind moved at last in the cedar upon the lawn. Chapter 11. A Trap of Cards and Coffee. I slept poorly. Twice in the night I started awake, certain I had heard a footfall in the corridor, and twice I lay listening, and heard nothing more than the wind. At last I fell into a heavy sleep, and was wakened by Poirot, fully dressed, drawing back the curtains upon a morning of clear pale gold. "Hastings, up, up! There is much to be done before 11 o'clock. "Poirot," I said, sitting up, "you have a plan?" "I have, mon ami, the foundations of a plan. The architecture, if you will permit. Must be raised in the next 3 hours. Come, we breakfast in our room. I have ordered it. Hodge has been most accommodating." Over coffee and toast he laid out his thinking. "Hastings, I have considered my position very carefully through the night. I have arrived, I believe, at the truth of who killed Sir Reginald Marchmont. I have a preponderance of evidence. The pomade in the secret drawer, the absent print at the foot of the pipe, the conversation reported to us last night by Lady Marchmont, the absence of any other plausible motive in the household. I have, however, no single piece of evidence which would, in a court of law, fix the guilt upon Dr. Brace beyond a reasonable doubt. I have only an arrangement of probabilities. That has rarely deterred you in the past. It has rarely deterred me, no. But this case has a peculiar feature. The accused is a respected medical man. He has been 30 years in this county. He will be defended ably. He will have the prejudice of every juror who has ever called upon him for a child's measles. I cannot rely upon the pomade, Hastings. The pomade is suggestive. It is not conclusive. I must require a confession. How shall you secure it? Poirot tapped his small forefinger upon the rim of his cup. I shall set him a trap. He must believe by this hour that he has succeeded. The death looks like the work of an outside intruder. The household is shocked but not suspicious. The police are pursuing a phantom. The new will was never written. Lady Marchmont, his almost lover, will, in time, become a widow with whom he may, after a decent interval, hope. He believes himself safe. Yes. Now, I shall this morning send a message to Dr. Brace, asking him to call at the house at 10:30. I shall receive him in the small morning room. I shall, in the course of conversation, drop an indication that I have in my possession a piece of evidence which incontrovertibly identifies the murderer, but that I shall not be naming the person until the gathering at 11. I shall give him to understand that the evidence is in a particular place, say the drawer of the writing desk in our bedroom, and that I am, just at that moment, leaving the morning room to fetch some other paper. And he will go to the bedroom. He will go to the bedroom. He will attempt to take the evidence. He will be observed by Inspector Japp, who will be concealed. And the evidence? There shall be evidence, Hastings. Or rather, there shall be a thing which appears to be evidence. I have prepared, this morning, a small leather case, in which I have placed certain papers, in fact blank papers, together with a scrap of writing in a hand approximating Sir Reginald's, in which I purport to identify the killer. The case shall be in the drawer. The good doctor shall, I venture, be unable to resist. And if he resists, if he is too clever, then we shall have lost the trap and shall be obliged to proceed by the longer road. But I do not think he will resist, Hastings. He has, I have observed in him, a particular weakness. He believes himself cleverer than others. Such men do not resist a chance to confirm their own cleverness. They walk into the snare with a small smile of self-satisfaction every time. He finished his coffee, he set down the cup. Inspector Japp arrives at 10. The good doctor is summoned for 30:30. The confrontation at 11. Allons, Hastings. The morning then took on the orderly quality of a campaign. Japp came, was briefed, expressed his usual mixture of scepticism and admiration, and stationed himself at the appointed hour in the dressing-room adjoining our bedroom, with the connecting door drawn to within 1/4 of an inch. I positioned myself in a small alcove of the corridor that gave a view of our bedroom door, with instructions to make no sound. Poirot, at 25 minutes past 10, took up his place in the morning room with a sheaf of innocent papers spread before him on a small table. At 29 minutes past 10, Dr. Brace was shown in by Hodge. I could not see what passed in the morning room. I heard faintly the murmur of voices, the small social pleasantries with which such conversations are begun, and then a longer murmur as Poirot, I could imagine the gestures, laid out his web. Some 12 minutes after Dr. Brace had entered, I heard Poirot's voice, raised slightly, saying clearly and with apparent absent-mindedness, "Forgive me, Doctor. I have left the second part of the document upstairs in our bedroom, the drawer of the writing desk, second from the top. Hastings has gone out. I shall be a moment." Then, footsteps along the hall and up the stair. Poirot's footsteps. They paused upon the landing. They went, without hurry, into the bedroom. I heard the bedroom door close. I waited. I held my breath. 40 seconds passed. A minute and a half. Then, and I shall confess I had begun to fear the trap would not work, there came along the corridor, with a hesitancy in the tread that was wholly absent in the man's professional walk, the figure of Dr. Lucian Brace. He was looking neither right nor left. He came to our bedroom door. He laid his hand upon the handle. He listened. He turned the handle very softly. He went in. I left my alcove. I walked, on the toes of my boots, the 8 or 9 paces to the door. I stopped just outside. Within, I heard the small sound of a drawer being drawn. I heard a brief silence, the silence of a man examining what he's found. Then, abruptly, I heard another sound, the sound of Inspector Japp's voice, calm and almost regretful, saying, "Good morning, Dr. Brace. Will you be so good as to put that case down upon the bed and to step away from it?" A very long silence. Then a thin, dry voice that was Brace's, and yet was not quite Brace's, saying, "I see. Yes, I see. Very well." I pushed the door open. Poirot was standing by the window, his small hands folded behind his back. Japp was in the centre of the room, between Brace and the door. Brace was holding the leather case I had heard described. He stood very still. His ruddy face had turned a dreadful colour, of a particular waxy yellow, that I had seen before only in men who have just received word of a disaster from which there is no recovering. "Doctor," said Poirot quietly, "shall we go down to the morning room? I think the conversation we should now have is one which is best conducted seated." Brace looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, and there was almost a smile, the ghost of one, "You set the bait, Monsieur Poirot. I admit I am surprised by the pleasure of it. Yes, let us go down." We went down. Behind us, 2 constables, Japp had brought them, followed at a discreet distance. The morning sun shone through the long windows of the hall. The clock struck 11:15. In a quarter of an hour the household was to assemble in the drawing-room. In a quarter of an hour the entire matter would be laid bare, but I had by then already heard the most important thing. In the morning-room, before Japp had even had time to caution him, Dr. Lucian Brace, sitting in the high-backed chair with his hands folded upon his knees, had said quietly, in the tone of a man at last setting down a great weight, "He should not have brought that boy into the house. He should not have done it. He destroyed everything." Chapter 12. The drawing-room at 11. At 11 the household was assembled. Lady Marchmont sat upon the sofa nearest the fire, very pale, her hands folded. Cynthia and Mr. Vane sat upon a smaller sofa opposite, the young man's hand upon the girl's. Edmund stood by the mantel, a glass already in his fingers. Mrs. Whitcomb occupied an armchair near the window, with her grey gown spread carefully about her. Miss Hartwood sat very upright in a stiff chair near the door, her keen eyes moving from face to face. Martin Reeve stood pale and uncertain near the bookcase. Hodge, at Poirot's request, was present also, standing by the door. Inspector Japp had taken up a position by the second door with 1 constable at his side. Dr. Brace, and this had been Poirot's particular insistence, sat upon a low chair in the centre of the room, his hands folded, his face composed, a constable behind him. I sat upon a hard chair near the side wall. Poirot stood before the fireplace, a small figure in his immaculate black, his green eyes moving slowly from one face to the next. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he began, I shall not detain you a moment longer than is necessary, but the matter is one which must be told in order, for it is of an order which is, even now, perhaps not entirely understood by all of you. Sir Reginald Marchmont was murdered, in the small hours of yesterday morning, in his own bedroom, by a hand which I shall name in the course of this account. The murder was the consequence of a secret which he himself had carried for some 30 years, and which he had at the very last resolved at last to bring into the light. He paused. The room was very still. I shall begin with the secret. Some 30 years ago, Sir Reginald Marchmont, a young guardsman in London, fathered a son upon a young woman named Eliza Reeve, who was in service in a household of his acquaintance. The young woman did not marry Sir Reginald. She was paid a sum sufficient for her needs and the child's, and she died by misfortune when the child was 2 years old. The child, Martin, was placed in a school, to whose costs Sir Reginald contributed throughout the boy's growth. He did not acknowledge the boy. He was at that period of his life ashamed of the affair, embarrassed of his family name, and willing to permit the child to grow up believing his father unknown and unknowable. I saw young Reeve's hand close upon the edge of the bookcase. I saw Cynthia turn her head, slowly, to look at him. I saw, yes, I saw. Lady Marchmont raise her eyes briefly to her husband's portrait above the fireplace and lower them again. 3 years ago, Poirot continued, by means I have not entirely traced, perhaps a deathbed letter from one of the original solicitors, perhaps a chance encounter, Sir Reginald discovered that the boy had grown to a young man of merit, and was in employment with a respectable firm in Manchester. He brought him here, gave him a position in his own household, and over the course of 3 years came to know him as the son he had never permitted himself to acknowledge. The acknowledgement was always private. He paid the young man generously, treated him with affection, but did not, and could not bring himself to, declare the relation publicly. 10 days ago, said Poirot, and his voice softened, he resolved to do so. He told the young man himself in a private interview. He spoke to me of his intention by letter, a letter he sat down to write on the night he died, and was prevented from finishing. He spoke of it also, in less direct terms, to his wife. Lady Marchmont did not raise her head. Now, the motive for the murder. Sir Reginald, in resolving to acknowledge his natural son, intended also to make a new will. The bulk of his property was, by his existing will, to descend to his daughter Cynthia, with a life interest to his wife, smaller bequests to his brother and to his elder daughter. The new will, while it would not have disinherited Cynthia, would have made substantial provision for Martin Reeve. It would also, by virtue of the public acknowledgement, have placed Lady Marchmont and the family generally in a position which some of them found intolerable. He let this sit a moment. Then he said, Lady Marchmont has been, for some time, in a relation of friendship of the most particular kind with one of those present in this room, Dr. Lucian Brace. She had spoken to Dr. Brace 10 days ago of her distress at her husband's intentions. Dr. Brace had received this confidence, and had brooded upon it. He had, in the days that followed, formed a resolution which he kept entirely to himself. He determined to prevent the new will and the public acknowledgement by the simplest means available, the death of his old friend. Before his old friend could write either. There was a small movement in the room. Dr. Brace had not stirred. On the night of the 25th, Poirot continued, Dr. Brace let himself into the house. He had, of course, the freedom of it. He had been a guest the previous evening, had taken his leave at 10:30, but had, by an arrangement of the cleverest simplicity, left a window in the gun-room upon the latch. He had returned on foot after the household was abed. He went up the back staircase. He proceeded to the gallery, where he removed an antique dagger from the case, of whose location he was perfectly familiar from many years' acquaintance with the house. He proceeded to the bedroom of his old friend. He found Sir Reginald not asleep but at his desk, in the act of writing the letter which has formed so important a part of this case. Sir Reginald, startled but not yet frightened, for Dr. Brace was a friend of the most intimate kind, rose. Dr. Brace approached. Dr. Brace struck. The blow was upward, beneath the breastbone, and was, as a medical man, expert. Sir Reginald fell, and was dead within 30 seconds. The doctor sat still. Dr. Brace then proceeded with the second part of his plan, which was to suggest that the killer had entered by the window and departed by the same route. He raised the lower sash, smeared the outer sill with a mixture of boot-blacking and dust which he had brought for the purpose, and took from his bag a small piece of equipment of his own contrivance, the sole of a man's boot, mounted upon a wooden handle. He had used this earlier in the evening, before climbing the gunroom window to press a single boot print into the soft earth at the foot of the drainpipe in the rose garden below. This print, made by a boot of no member of the household, was intended to convince the police of an outside intruder. It was a single print because to have made several would have required a degree of plausibility, varied depths, varied angles, which Dr. Brace, knowing the limits of his own skill in such matters, did not attempt. Dr. Brace's eyes, and this I shall remember, closed just for a moment, in what might have been the smallest acknowledgement of professional respect. Dr. Brace then withdrew from the bedroom. He locked the door from the corridor side by means of a thin steel rod with which he was able, after closing the door, to manipulate the key from outside, and to leave the key lying upon the inner side of the floor 3 feet from the lock, a position consistent to the unsuspecting eye, with the key having been struck out by the forcing of the door. He proceeded down the back staircase through the gunroom, refastening the window from outside by means of a small device he had attached to the latch upon his earlier visit, and back to his own house, perhaps a mile distant, where he was once again abed and asleep some time before 3 in the morning. The dogs in the stable yard, which gave a short bark at 3:15, were the only witnesses to his return. "You have?" said Dr. Brace quietly. "The dogs slightly out of order. I went out at 1, I returned at 3, the bark was upon my return. Otherwise, most remarkable indeed." Lady Marchmont made a sound, and Adela Whitcomb, who sat nearest, took her hand. "There remains," said Poirot, "one matter. Some 6 months ago, Lady Marchmont, entirely separately, opened a secret drawer in her husband's desk and read the papers there, including the documents concerning Martin Reeve. She did not remove them. She replaced them and said nothing. 8 days ago, however, after the conversation in which her husband had foreshadowed his intentions, Dr. Brace, having been told by her of the existence of these papers, came to the house in the daytime on a routine call and removed them. He removed them so that, after his old friend's death, no document should remain to identify Martin Reeve as the natural son. He left in the drawer only the dust, which was, and this was his single error of execution, disturbed in a particular pattern, and faintly scented with the pomade he uses upon his hair, which I had occasion to identify yesterday afternoon. He paused. "The papers, I imagine, are now ash. Are they, Doctor?" Dr. Brace considered. "They are ash, monsieur. I burnt them on the night of the 23rd. Then the matter is, in its main outlines, complete. I shall not detain you further. Inspector Japp." Japp stepped forward. "Dr. Lucian Brace, I must ask you to come with me. Anything you say—" Yes, Inspector. Spare us the formula. I shall come quietly." Brace rose. He looked just once at Lady Marchmont, who was now openly weeping. He inclined his head, the smallest of nods, almost courtly. Then he walked, between Japp and the constable, out of the drawing-room and out of Thornfield Cross. For some moments after the door had closed, no one spoke. Then Cynthia rose, crossed the room with a steady step, and went to Martin Reeve. She took his hand. "Martin," she said. "Brother." He looked at her and could not answer. It was Miss Hartwood, of all people, angular, watchful Miss Hartwood, who broke first. She stood, gathered her shawl about her shoulders, and said in a voice unexpectedly thick, "I knew Eliza Reeve. I was at school with her sister in Devon. I have known of this matter in part for many years. I'm ashamed to say I did not speak of it." Poirot turned to her. "Mademoiselle, you wrote to Sir Reginald, did you not, in the early summer? An anonymous letter, urging him to do right by the boy." Miss Hartwood lifted her chin. "I did. I did not give my name. I am not proud of the cowardice of it, but I'm glad I wrote it." "It was, mademoiselle, the letter that decided him at last. Without you, the matter might have lain hidden another 20 years. She nodded once and sat down again and put her face into her hands. I looked at Poirot. He stood by the fire, his small green eyes very bright and very tired. The hour had struck 12. Outside, beyond the long windows, the cedar moved gently in the autumn wind, and a single rook called, harsh and far, across the empty fields. Chapter 13. The Fragments. After the afternoon that followed was strange beyond my power to describe. The household, having lost in the space of 2 hours both its master and the man it had imagined a friend, did not know what to do with itself. The wedding was, of course, deferred. Sin die, as Mr. Vane gravely put it. Cynthia, taking some private resolution that did her credit, asked her brother, for so she now insisted upon naming Reeve, to dine with her and Mr. Vane in the small dining room that evening, and so the three of them sat down together for the first time, and I was told afterwards that they did not part company until very late. Lady Marchmont kept to her room. Her physician, a new physician, hastily summoned from a nearby town, pronounced her in a state of nervous prostration and prescribed rest. Adela Whitcomb, in a gesture I had not anticipated of her, took up a station at her stepmother's bedside and remained there, with intervals for the next 2 days. Edmund, having drunk 3 further whiskies between noon and 3, fell asleep in the library and was not seen again until breakfast. Miss Hartwood walked, alone, in the knot garden for some hours. Poirot and I, having no immediate further function to perform, took ourselves out into the autumn afternoon. The day had grown bright again. A cold breeze moved the high, yellowing leaves of the elms. We walked to the long terrace, where Sir Reginald had been accustomed to take his pipe before dinner, and seated ourselves upon a stone bench at its end. For a long time, Poirot did not speak. "Hastings," he said at length, "there is a question I see you have been wishing to ask, but have not asked. I shall answer it before you put it. Was Lady Marchmont guilty?" "Yes." "In the eyes of the law, no. In the eyes of conscience, Hastings, who shall say? She did not strike the blow, she did not conceive the plan, but she let fall, into a soil she knew to be receptive, the seed from which the act grew. She knew the manner of man Lucian Brace was. She knew that to tell him of her husband's intentions was to tell a man whose mind, where she was concerned, ran already towards extremity. She told him. She did not tell him in order that he should kill, but neither did she, not perhaps in her conscious thought, but in some less conscious chamber, entirely refuse the possibility. And when, 5 days before the act, he said to her, "The wedding shall not take place," she did not press him, did not warn her husband, did not, though she had 100 opportunities to speak. Will the law touch her? The law will not touch her. Conscience will. There is, my friend, a distinction between the deeds we commit and the deeds we permit, but for the man or woman of any moral seriousness, the second is, in the long view, scarcely lighter than the first. I considered this. And Brace Poirot. What was he really? A moment ago, in the morning room, when he gave way at last, he said, he should not have brought that boy into the house. He destroyed everything. That was the cry of a man who had lost something quite separate from the woman. Ah, Hastings, you have seen it. Yes. Lucian Brace was a man who, more than he loved Helena Marchmont, more than he wished to inherit her, loved his own position. He was the family physician. He was over 30 years the trusted intimate. He had been, in his own small way, almost a member of the family. The arrival of Martin Reeve, the prospect of the public acknowledgement, the new will, the great rearrangement, was, to him, the disturbance not merely of an inheritance but of his own social standing. Reeve would have been the favourite. Brace would have been displaced. A new generation would have grown around Sir Reginald, and Brace would have found himself, after 30 years, an outsider. He destroyed everything. That was the cry of a small, vain man whose whole existence had been bound up in a position he believed himself secure in, and who could not bear to see it overturned. And so, for that, he killed his oldest friend. For that, mon ami, for very much less than that, men have killed their oldest friends. Vanity, Hastings, is the most dangerous of human motives. It looks always like something else, duty or love or principle, but at the bottom of it, when one has scraped away the colours, there is only the small pale face of I. We sat in silence. The shadows on the lawn lengthened. A flock of starlings rose in unison from a stand of oaks, wheeled and settled again. "Poirot," I said, "I've been thinking of the title of my report of this case, if I should ever come to write it." "Ah?" "I have thought of the killer Poirot had already cleared." He turned upon me an eye of mild surprise. "How so, Hastings?" "Why, when first you went on your pretext to each of the men of the household sniffing for the pomade, you cleared, in your own mind, almost everyone. Vane, Reeve, Hodge. None used the pomade in question. You came to Brace with a kind of distant courtesy. asking him about his medical history. You spoke with him, you were close to him, you smelt the pomade at his collar, and you knew. And yet, to me, watching, you betrayed nothing. You moved on, you passed him by, you smiled, if I recall, and shook his hand. The killer, and you had cleared him. Poirot was silent a moment. Then he gave that small, dry chuckle which was his nearest approach to laughter. It is, mon ami, not a bad title. It has its small irony. But it is incomplete. For of course I did not clear him. I had merely identified him without yet permitting him to know that I had done so. The cleverness of the title is that it suggests two meanings, that the killer was the one I had passed over, and that he was the one whom, for an interval of 2 days, I had to pretend to have passed over. Both are true, sweat. You may use the title with my blessing, though when I am the subject I should perhaps have preferred something more flattering. You have always told me, Poirot, that titles do not flatter detectives. They only describe what was done. Then describe, Hastings. Describe. But describe carefully. There is, in this case, a sadness which will not, I think, leave me for some time. We rose. The light upon the lawn had turned the colour of wine. Behind us the house stood quietly in its place. I could see through one upper window a single lamp burning. It was, I thought, in Lady Marchmont's room, where her stepdaughter was sitting still with her, in a kind of vigil that seemed from this distance like the beginning of a peace. Chapter 14. A Walk in Cheltenham. 3 days later, Inspector Japp called upon us at our hotel in Cheltenham, where Poirot and I had retreated to await the close of the formalities. He came at 6 in the evening, with a folder under his arm and a look upon his face that I had come to read as 1 part professional satisfaction and 1 part private discomfort. Well, Poirot, he has confessed in full. Ah. Made it easy on us. I shouldn't wonder. He's a clever fellow, knows how the wheels turn. With the boot-sole device and the steel rod and the boot blacking and all. They were in his garden shed, behind a watering can. He surrendered them at once. He gave us the whole sequence. The window in the gun-room, the back stairs, the dagger from the gallery, the lot. There won't be a defence. There can't be. It is a poor business, Japp. It is a poor business, Mr. Poirot. I'll not deny it. He's a respectable man. Was. 30 years in the village. Children he brought into the world. Old folks he sat up with the last night of their lives. They'll not believe it hereabouts, even when they see him hanged. Poirot was silent. And Lady Marchmont, Japp went on after a moment, I've taken her statement in the gentlest manner. She told me everything. Same as she told you. There's no charge there, Mr. Poirot. Not by the strict letter. She didn't conspire. She didn't withhold material knowledge of an intended crime. She only had one phrase, said 5 days before the deed, that even she had taken at the time for fancy. No jury would convict, and frankly no Crown Counsel would prosecute. But, said Poirot quietly, she will live with it. She will live with it. Yes. And the young man, Martin Reeve, he's been to a solicitor in town. There's a question of whether some provision can yet be made out of the estate, even without the new will. The young Miss Cynthia has spoken to her solicitors herself, most generously by all accounts. She wishes to settle a sum upon him, as the family's acknowledgment even now. The half-sister supports her. The brother, Edmund, well, he's reserved his opinion, but he'll come round. They're a family that's had a shock, but they're a family, Mr. Poirot. They'll close round. It is well. And Mr. Vane? A small pause. Mr. Vane has... This is between us, Mr. Poirot. Has chosen to release Miss Cynthia from the engagement, of his own accord. He said, and I had this from the elder Miss Marchmont, that is, Mrs. Whitcomb, that he had begun, in the past month, to feel that the marriage was not founded upon a sufficiency of mutual feeling, that he had behaved foolishly in the past, in a matter which I gather you know of, and that he believed Miss Cynthia would be better served by a longer freedom. They parted, I am told, on good terms. And Mrs. Whitcomb? Mrs. Whitcomb has gone to her own house in Surrey. She was much affected. In the end, Japp closed his folder. Well, there it is. The case. Closed. I shan't trouble you further, Mr. Poirot, and I'll say this, and you may take it as a piece of professional candour from a man who's known you 20 years. There's not 3 of us at the Yard would have read that pomade. Poirot made his small, neat gesture of dismissal. It is a question, my friend, of having a nose, and of training the nose, as you have in your own field, your own instruments. I have my instruments, yes, Japp grinned. And when they fail, I have you, Poirot. I have you. He took his leave. We dined that evening in the hotel's small dining room. Poirot ate slowly and spoke little. Afterwards we walked along the promenade in the soft amber lamplight. The Cheltenham evening was mild, and a light fog moved among the high plane trees. "Hastings," Poirot said at last, "there is a feature of this affair which has continued for these 3 days to disturb me. I shall tell it to you, and you may help me to think of it, for I have not yet placed it satisfactorily. Yes, it is the matter of the timing of the trap, the pomade trap, by which I lured the doctor up to our bedroom. He went, you will recall. He took the case. He was caught. We drew from him, in the moment of catching, the words he should not have brought that boy into the house. He destroyed everything. Yes. Hastings, those words came too easily. They came as if from a man who had, I do not know how to say it, already accepted that he should be caught. As if, in some chamber of himself, he had, in the days since the murder, prepared his speech for the moment. You think he wished, in some part, to be caught? I think, mon ami, that he was, when it came to it, a man who could not bear to have killed his oldest friend. He had carried the act 4 days, and 4 days was long enough. He had become, in the privacy of his own conscience, a man with whom he could not eventually live. The trap was a courtesy. He stepped into it almost gratefully. Had I not set the trap, he would, I think, have given himself up within a fortnight. I considered this. Then he was, after all, not entirely the small vain man you described. He was both, Hastings. He was the small vain man who killed for his position, and he was the older friend who, having killed, could not endure himself for it. We are, all of us, more than one person. The crime the small vain man commits, the larger and better self has, sometimes, to settle. That is the deepest melancholy of human life, my friend. We are not ever only one creature. We live with sometimes the ones we have been, and the ones we wish we had been, and the ones we never thought we should turn out to be. We walked in silence to the end of the promenade. A church clock struck 9. A faint thin moon was visible through the haze. Hastings, Poirot said, we shall return to London tomorrow. Yes. I think I shall not take a country case again for some little while. I find them disagreeable to me at present. I will work upon some pleasant, dreary, mechanical thing, an embezzlement perhaps in a city firm, something with no families in it, and no old friendships, and no widows in dove grey at the bedside. I laughed in spite of myself. We shall see, Poirot, how long that lasts. We shall see, mon ami, we shall see. We turned at last and walked back through the lamplit promenade towards our hotel. I have, in writing this, looked back at my notebook of those days, and I find a small entry, in my own hand, dated the evening of which I have just spoken. It reads simply, he was not himself for a week. He spoke little. He ate less. He wrote no letters. Then, on the 8th day, he laughed at something in the morning paper, and was, by the afternoon, again entirely Poirot, and demanded an omelette of 3 eggs at lunch, and complained at length to the waiter about the firmness of it. I have not since had occasion to revise this account. Chapter 15. A letter from Cynthia, the following spring. In May of the following year, when London had grown warm and the plane trees of the squares were in their first full leaf, Poirot received a letter at his Whitehaven Mansions flat. It bore the postmark of a Gloucestershire village. He opened it with, I observed, a more careful attention than he gave to most morning correspondence. He read it through. Then he read it a second time. Then, without speaking, he passed it across the breakfast table to me. Thornfield Cross, 3rd May, 1935. Dear Monsieur Poirot, I have hesitated to write this letter for many months, and now that I write it, I am unsure how it will read to you. I shall try to be brief and clear, as I think you would wish me. We are all here, more or less at peace. Helena, I cannot, perhaps, expect you to understand how I have come, in these months, to call her Helena, but it is the case, has retired to a small house upon the coast in Cornwall, where the air is said to suit her, and where she lives quietly with one servant. She does not, I believe, expect to return to Thornfield. Adela has been with her for much of the winter. She returned to her own house in March. Edmund has taken a position with a firm of his old regimental friends in London. He is, by all reports, doing well, and has taken the pledge upon spirits, which I had not expected and am very glad of. Martin and I, and here, monsieur, is the thing I most wish to tell you, are living together at Thornfield. He has taken the name Marchmont by deed poll, with my full and willing concurrence. The estate has been settled by my own decision in such a way that he and I share equally, with provision for any children either of us may have. He has begun reading for the bar, which I think will suit him. He has my father's mind for fact and his patience. I am not married. Mr. Vane, of whom you may remember kind things and unkind, has gone abroad and writes to me sometimes from places I have not seen. I am content as I am. I think I was very young when I came to be engaged, and very sad, and I think I confuse two feelings that are not the same. But I am not unhappy, monsieur, and I am not lonely. I have my brother, and a great deal of the management of an estate which I had not previously realized gave one such intense satisfaction. I write now because I have, in the last few weeks, been looking through my father's older papers. I found, in a drawer in the cabinet of the morning room, not the secret drawer of the desk, but quite an ordinary drawer, a letter which had not been completed and which was addressed to Martin. It is in my father's hand, and it is dated 3 weeks before his death. It begins, I shall copy you the opening, as I think it may interest you. My dear son, I have been for 30 years a coward, and these last 3 years a continuing one. It is time at last to write what I should have spoken long ago. I shall, in this letter, set out what I should have told you upon your 10th birthday, if I had been the man I now half flatter myself I have become. I write it now because I find that I am old, and because I find too that I have come, in spite of myself, to love you as a son. I shall not hide behind further years. It does not finish. He set it aside, monsieur, and did not return to it. I do not know why. Perhaps he found he could not in writing say what he wished to say. Perhaps he resolved instead upon the conversation he had 10 days before his death, with Martin himself, and which Martin has told me of. I do not know. But I have given Martin the letter, and he keeps it now in a small box upon his desk, and I think he is, though it is only a fragment, comforted by it. I write too because I wished you to know that what you did at Thornfield Cross last September, painful as it was, has resulted in the month since in a healing which I should not before have believed possible. We have lost my father. We have lost Lucian Brace in another and stranger way. But Martin has gained, late and incompletely, a family which is his by blood, and now also by name, and I have gained a brother. And this, monsieur, you must permit me to thank you for, even though you would say quite truly that you did no more than tell the truth. I shall not detain you longer. If you and Captain Hastings are ever in the West Country, you will find Thornfield always glad of you. We do not, I should warn you, keep grand company any longer. We keep in the main to ourselves and our books. Yours, with very great gratitude, Cynthia Marchmont. I set down the letter. I looked across the breakfast table at Poirot. He had risen from his chair. He had walked to the window, and he stood there, looking down upon the morning traffic of Whitehaven Mansions, with his small hands folded behind his back. After perhaps a minute he said, without turning, "Hastings?" "Yes." "This morning I think we shall not work upon the embezzlement. We shall instead— What shall we do, Hastings?" "Whatever you wish, Poirot." "We shall walk in the park. We shall feed the ducks. I shall buy you a coffee at the kiosk near the bridge. And we shall think for an hour of how a thing may be set in motion, as Sir Reginald set in motion at last the matter of his son, and may not be completed by the man who began it, and yet may by the kindness of those who come after be completed all the same." He turned. His small green eyes in the morning light were, I thought, brighter than I had seen them in some time. "Come, mon ami, the ducks of St. James's Park are not patient, and they will remember if we are late." We took our hats. We went down to the street, and we walked, in the May sunlight, towards the green and shining trees of the park. Behind us, in the breakfast room, the letter lay folded upon the cloth, with the morning sun falling across it. And somewhere, far to the west, in a country house whose chimneys I was never to see again, a young woman and her brother sat down to their own breakfast, in a piece that had been very dearly bought and very dearly earned. Chapter 16. Poirot's Reflection in Whitehaven Mansions. It was much later, in the autumn of that same year, that Poirot and I, sitting one evening in his flat, returned at last in conversation to the affair of Sir Reginald Marchmont. The fire was lit, the curtains drawn, we had dined, and Poirot was occupied in the meticulous polishing of a small silver paper knife, which he employed upon his correspondence and which he held to require attention not less than once a fortnight. "Hastings," he said. "Yes." "You have, I believe, completed your account of the affair at Thornfield." "I have. I had been meaning to ask you whether you would care to read it, and to correct any errors of fact." He held out his small hand. I rose, fetched the manuscript, and gave it to him. He laid down the paper knife, settled the manuscript upon his knee, and began to read. He read for some 40 minutes. He read with that particular stillness of attention which I had come over the years to know was his deepest reading. I sat opposite with a book of my own in my lap, of which I read scarcely a page. The fire ticked. The clock on the mantel struck the half-hour. At length, Poirot turned the last page, set down the manuscript upon the small table beside him, and folded his hands. "Hastings." "Yes." "It is well done. I have only 2 corrections of fact which are negligible. You have placed the cedar slightly to the south of where it stood, and you have given Edmund Marchmont an extra year. These are nothing. But there is one thing I should wish you to add before you submit it to your editor, if you will." "Of course." "Add, at some point in the chapter of reflection, this. There are 2 kinds of murder, Hastings, that are committed in the world. There is the murder of passion, in which a man who has not until that moment thought of killing finds himself, in the heat of an instant, with the deed already done, and there is the murder of calculation, in which a man, having considered the act, having weighed it, having chosen it as the best of available means, proceeds to carry it out. The murder of passion is, in its nature, half confessed before it is committed. The murderer has not concealed his rage, and the world, after the fact, can read the matter clearly. The murder of calculation is the more dangerous, for the calculator has weighed concealment as one of his factors, and has often arranged matters so that the act may be mistaken for accident, or for the work of an outsider, or for any of 100 other things. Yes. But here, my friend, is what I should wish you to add. The murder of calculation has very often a single weakness, and that weakness is this. The calculator has imagined the act, but has not imagined himself afterwards. He has thought of the dispatch, the disposal, the alibi, the misdirection. He has not thought of his own breakfast on the morning following, nor of his own face in the glass when he shaves, nor of the moment when an old friend says to him 3 days later, "Did you hear the news of poor Reginald?" And he, who knows everything, he must look surprised. The calculator plans, with great cleverness, the killing of another man. He does not plan, and cannot plan, the killing of his own innocence. It dies when the deed is done, and it leaves behind, in the body of the murderer, a small empty room which he was not expecting, and which he has, for the rest of his life, no notion of how to fill. He paused. That is what was wrong with Lucian Brace Hastings in the morning room when Japp arrested him. That is why he was almost relieved. He had not anticipated the empty room. He had not known that to kill an old friend was also to kill that part of himself which had been the friend's friend, and he had, in the days following, found himself living with a stranger, in a house he could no longer recognise as his own. The trap I set for him caught the small vain man. But the small vain man had already been overtaken from within by the man who had begun, for the first time in 50 years, to know himself. He paused again. The fire shifted. A small log fell with a soft sound. Add that, Hastings, or do not add it. It is in any case, for I have told it to you, now between us. I shall add it, Poirot. Bon, then I'm content. He took up the paper knife once more and resumed his polishing. I sat for some time, looking at the fire. I thought of Sir Reginald in his bedroom at 3 a.m, writing his last unfinished letter. I thought of Lucian Brace, in the hour before dawn, walking back across the dark fields to his own house, with the dagger wiped and replaced, and his careful misdirections all in place, and the small empty room already, perhaps, beginning to make itself felt within him. I thought of Cynthia Marchmont sitting now, perhaps with her brother beside the fire at Thornfield, in a piece that had been bought at a cost I should not, even after all my years with Poirot, have wished to pay. I thought of Lady Marchmont, in her cottage by the Cornish sea, with her one servant and her conscience, and the slow consolations of the wind off the water. "Poirot," I said at last. "Yes." "You said the title I had thought of, The Killer Poirot had already cleared, was incomplete." "I said so, yes." "Have you a better one?" He considered. He laid down the paper knife. "I have, in the course of the case, thought of several. The bedroom of honey-coloured stone, a coward and a fool, the pomade in the drawer, the wedding that was not." He shook his head. "None of these has the small irony of yours. Keep yours, Hastings. It says in 5 words what the case was. That you cleared the killer, that I cleared him, and he was the killer all the same. The phrase has, you see, a double sense. To clear a man is, in our English usage, both to remove him from suspicion and to remove him from a room, to clear him out, as the housekeeper clears the breakfast things. I cleared the doctor in your sense, that is, I appeared to pass him over in my hunt, while in fact knowing him for the man. And in the end, at the gathering, in the morning room, I cleared him, in the housekeeper's sense, from the family, from the village, from the world he had spoiled. Both clearings, Hastings, are true. The title says them both at once. I had not seen the second. You had not seen, mon ami, but you had felt. That is why you chose the words. The grey cells, you understand, are not always at the front of the head. They work also at the back, where one cannot watch them. They are, yes, wiser, sometimes, than the man who carries them about." He smiled, the small private smile that I had seen perhaps 100 times in 20 years. "Hastings, I am tired. Let us for tonight leave the affair in its place. Tomorrow there is, at last, the embezzlement in the city. It will be a small matter. There will be no widows in dove grey, no cedars upon any lawn, no fragments of unfinished letters. We shall be very glad of it." "Yes, Poirot." He rose, set the paper knife in its place upon the writing desk, took up his small candle, for he was old-fashioned in this, and would not be persuaded to a bedside lamp, and went, with his small precise step, to the door. "Good night, Hastings. Good night, Poirot." He went out. I heard his door close along the passage. I sat a little longer by the fire. I thought, again, of Thornfield Cross, of the cedar upon its lawn, of the long case clock in the hall, of the rose garden beneath Sir Reginald's window, of the single boot print pressed into the soft earth by a man who had not foreseen what the act would cost him. I thought of all the secrets that lie in old country houses beneath the stones, and I thought of how sometimes a single letter, undelivered, can in its turn deliver a household at last from a darkness it had not known it was carrying. The fire sank. The clock struck 12. I rose, banked the embers, extinguished the lamp, and went with my own less elegant tread to bed. In the morning, the embezzlement awaited us, and after the embezzlement, in due course, there would be other affairs, other houses, other letters interrupted in their writing. For the world, as Poirot had often observed, has not yet finished the production of its murderers, nor the inventing of new occasions for their work. But that, as the saying goes, is another story.